Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're really digging into something crucial for anyone leading a consumer packaged goods company in the US right now.
Hmm.
The title says it all: Supply Chains Under Pressure. How CPG leaders can respond to tariffs. Because, let's be honest, these aren't just abstract economic things anymore, they're hitting hard.
That's exactly right. As we're moving through 2025, tariffs well, they're very much a reality,
Mm,
especially for CPG food and bev.
big time.
Yeah, we're seeing some import rates just skyrocket. I mean, as high as 125% on certain really key inputs.
Wow.
It's the kind of jolt that, frankly, demands immediate focus
Mm.
if you want to keep things stable,
Mm.
operationally and financially.
Absolutely. So, our goal here today in this deep dive is to kind of cut through all the noise. We want to pull out the really critical info on what these tariffs actually mean for you day to
And
day.
more than just understanding, right?
Yes, exactly. And map out some concrete actions, things you can actually do. Think of this as maybe your shortcut to getting up to speed and building a more resilient company in this, well, tricky trade environment.
Okay, so let's jump right in, the core question.
Yeah.
What are these new challenges that tariffs are creating for CPG leaders?
Right.
Well, the most obvious one, the one everyone feels first, is cost. Pure and simple. Tariffs on raw materials, on packaging, it just drives up your input costs directly.
And in CPG, margins can already be pretty tight, can't they? So that kind of pressure, it really puts you in a tough spot.
It really does.
Do you eat the cost, try to pass it on to consumers who are maybe getting more price conscious, or find some other way?
It's a tough balancing act, no doubt. And it's not just the sticker price of the imports either. We're also seeing real delays starting to creep in.
Ah, the operational side.
Yeah, delays in sourcing, particularly from areas like Asia, which have been, major hubs for CPG for a long time. And these aren't small delays sometimes.
Yeah.
We're talking potential bottlenecks that can just jam up your whole production flow.
Which leads straight to, well, the thing that keeps people up at night in this industry: stockouts.
Mm-hmm.
You can have the best product, the best marketing, but if it's not actually there on the shelf.
You lose the sale
Mhm.
and potentially the customer. It's all about keeping things running smoothly, that operational continuity, and these tariffs are like throwing a big spanner in the works.
Definitely. And you mentioned consumers. That's a huge piece of this. They are getting more sensitive to price, aren't they?
Oh, absolutely. Budgets are tight for a lot of households. And we're seeing data showing consumers are more willing than maybe ever before to switch brands if they see a price jump they link to these tariffs.
So that brand loyalty buffer might be thinner than people think.
It can be surprisingly fragile, yeah, when wallets get squeezed.
So it's like a pincer movement. Costs are going up, but your ability to just pass those costs along is limited by what the consumer will actually bear.
Exactly.
Right.
It really highlights why you need to be proactive, not reactive.
But it's not just about goods coming into the US, is it? There's a bigger picture here, internationally speaking.
That's a crucial point. Things like the Wikipedia overview of the 2025 tariffs really show how this works. U.S. tariffs often lead to other countries putting up their own tariffs in response. Retaliation.
Right, the tit for tat.
Precisely. So if your CPG company sells overseas or hopes to grow internationally, well, suddenly your exports might face new hurdles too.
So it could hit you on both ends: higher costs for what you bring in and new barriers for what you send out.
It's a definite risk, a potential double whammy impacting both your cost structure and your growth plans abroad. Imagine, a new tariff hitting your packaged snacks going into a key European market. That could really stall things.
Okay, so the picture is, well, it's challenging. Higher input costs, margin pressure, supply chain delays, the risk of stockouts, consumers getting very price sensitive, and then this added layer of retaliatory tariffs messing with exports.
It's a lot to juggle.
It really is. So let's pivot to solutions. What can CPG leaders, specifically here in the US, actually do to build resilience? You mentioned first step earlier, something foundational.
Yes, absolutely. Step one has to be conducting a really thorough, full supply chain mapping exercise.
Okay, mapping. What does that entail exactly? Just knowing your main suppliers.
It goes much deeper than that. You
Oh.
need really granular visibility, not just your tier one suppliers, but who they buy from your tier twos, maybe even tier threes. Where do all the components, the raw materials, actually originate?
So, creating a detailed family tree for your products.
That's a good way to put it. You need that complete blueprint because only then can you really understand the tariff impact.
Okay, makes sense. So why is that level of detail so critical specifically because of tariffs?
Because you need to pinpoint exactly where in that chain the tariff hits are happening. which specific materials, which components, which packaging elements are subject to these duties.
Got it. Zeroing in on the pain points.
Exactly. And once you have that map, then you can start stress testing it. What if this key ingredient from this region gets hit with another 10%? What if shipping from that tariff zone gets delayed by 3 weeks? You need to model those scenarios.
And figure out your vulnerabilities before they happen.
Precisely. You know, resources like McKinsey's work on resilient supply chains offer some great frameworks for doing this kind of vulnerability check. Finding those weak spots you might not even know you have.
Okay, that's super practical. You can't fix a weak link if you don't know it exists. So, step 1, deep dive mapping. Got it. What's action step number 2?
The second key move is to actively diversify your sourcing. And where it makes sense, look at regionalizing production.
Okay, diversification, meaning don't rely too heavily on one country or one region.
Exactly. Especially if that region is now heavily impacted by tariffs. Putting all your eggs in one basket geographically just multiplies your risk right now.
So what are the realistic alternatives people should be looking at?
Well, we're definitely seeing more focus on building stronger supplier options closer to home. Think Mexico, Canada.
Our neighbors?
Right. Central America is also popping up more often for certain types of goods, and even looking more seriously at domestic sourcing within the U.S. itself.
Bringing it back on shore, or at least closer.
Yeah, it can really buffer you against some of these global trade shocks. You know, folks like Clarkston Consulting have some good insights specifically on how tariffs are hitting food and bev and why this diversification is so strategic.
And this idea of regionalizing production, that sounds like a bigger step. Does that mean building new factories?
Not necessarily, or at least not right away. It could start with finding contract manufacturing partners in Mexico, for example.
Ah, okay. So using existing facilities in those closer regions.
Exactly. It lets you shorten those supply lines, reduce the tariff exposure, maybe without needing huge upfront capital investment immediately. It's about becoming more agile.
Right. Agility seems key. Okay, so we've mapped the supply chain. We're looking at diversifying suppliers and maybe regionalizing some production. What's next on the resilience checklist?
Number 3 is about rebalancing your inventory and your distribution strategy.
Inventory. So holding more stock.
Potentially, yes. For those critical inputs, the raw materials, the packaging that are most affected by tariffs and potential delays, it probably makes sense to increase your safety stock levels.
Building a buffer.
Exactly. A buffer against that volatility and those unexpected disruptions. It gives you breathing room.
Makes sense. What about the distribution side?
You also need to take a hard look at your warehousing network. Is it optimized for this new reality? Maybe having warehouses closer to your key customers makes more sense now, or closer to where your manufacturing is, or might be moving.
Okay, aligning distribution with these sourcing changes.
Right. And this is also where things like bonded warehouses or foreign trade zones, FTZs, come into play.
FTCs, tell me more about that. How does that help with tariffs?
Well, basically, the U.S. Customs FTZ program allows companies to bring goods into a designated zone without immediately paying duties. You can delay paying the tariffs, or sometimes even reduce or eliminate them if those goods are then used in manufacturing within the zone and maybe exported again, or even sometimes when they enter U.S. commerce later.
Huh. So it's like a tool to manage the cash flow impact of tariffs.
Exactly. It can be a really smart strategic lever to pull, especially for imported components used in manufacturing. Worth looking into the specifics from U.S. Customs.
Interesting. Okay, a potential financial tool there. Moving on to action step 4, product and packaging optimization. This sounds like getting creative with the actual stuff you sell.
It is. And one maybe counterintuitive way is to look at rationalizing your stock keeping units.
Cutting down on the number of different products you offer.
Potentially, yes. Simplifying your portfolio, maybe focusing on your core high-volume items. Why? Because fewer SKUs usually means less complexity in sourcing.
Ah, fewer different ingredients or packages to worry about getting hit by tariffs.
Exactly. You might be able to shift focus to products whose supply chains are inherently more stable or less exposed to the current tariffs.
Makes sense from a risk management perspective. What about the packaging itself? Seems like a prime target.
Absolutely. If your products rely heavily on, say, aluminum cans or certain plastics that are getting hit hard by tariffs,
Time to rethink.
time to seriously explore redesigns. Can you use alternative materials that aren't tariffed or less so? Can you re-engineer the package to use less of the tariff material but still keep the product safe and appealing?
Right. Material science and design innovation.
Yes. And tied to that, emphasizing locally sourced ingredients where it's feasible. It's not just a marketing plus, though consumers often like that.
It's also a supply chain hedge.
Exactly. It can naturally insulate you from some of these global tariff issues. Publications like Food Logistics often have good articles on navigating these packaging cost challenges.
Okay, so streamlining products, rethinking packaging. Got it. Action step number 5 brings in other players. Collaboration.
Yes, this is huge. No CPG company exists in a vacuum. You need to be talking early and often and transparently with your partners, especially retailers and distributors.
About what specifically? Just warning them about price increases.
That's part of it, certainly. Nobody likes cost surprises, but it should go deeper. Can you develop joint promotional strategies?
How would that work?
Maybe you and a key retailer agree to co-fund a temporary promotion to ease the impact of a necessary price increase on the consumer, sharing the burden a bit.
Ah, finding ways to soften the blow together.
Right. And look for other collaborative wins, too. Can you consolidate shipments with partners, share warehouse space, find efficiencies together that help offset some of these new tariff costs across the whole value chain?
So it's about teamwork, really, not just pushing costs down the line.
Exactly. Shared problems, shared solutions.
Okay, that leads us to the final action step, number 6. This one's about looking outward, staying engaged with trade policy and industry advocacy.
Yeah, you really can't afford to just put your head down and hope this blows over. You need to be actively monitoring what's happening. Keep an eye on announcements from the U.S. Trade Representative, the USTR.
Staying informed on the rules of the game as they change.
Crucial for making proactive decisions. If you know a tariff change is coming, you can adapt your strategy before it hits, not after.
And how can one company, especially maybe a smaller CPG firm, actually influence policy? It seems daunting.
That's where industry advocacy comes in. Participating in your trade associations is key.
Like the Consumer Brands Association.
Exactly, they're a great example. These groups represent the collective voice of the industry. They have the resources and connections to engage in lobbying, to advocate for policies that maybe lessen the negative impact of these tariffs.
Just strength in numbers.
Precisely. It gives the industry a seat at the table. They often have great resources too, like tariff trackers or analysis that individual companies can benefit from.
Okay, so stay informed, join forces with your peers, and make your voice heard collectively. It really sounds like a multi-pronged strategy is needed here.
It absolutely is. There's no single silver bullet. These tariffs are a significant test, there's no doubt about it. A test of supply chain resilience.
But you also mentioned opportunity. How can this disruption be an opportunity?
Well, think about it. The companies that react smartly, that are proactive, that implement these kinds of steps we've talked about, they're not just surviving, they're actually building stronger, more agile, more resilient business models.
So they could potentially come out of this stronger than competitors who are slow to adapt.
That's the potential, yes. This forces companies to examine weaknesses they might have ignored before. Supply chain resilience isn't just, an operational task anymore. It's a core strategic issue.
Right up there at the leadership level.
Absolutely. Founders, CFOs, operations VPs. Everyone needs to see this as critical. The companies that take decisive action now, they're positioning themselves not just to weather this storm, but potentially to outperform in the long run.
That's a really powerful way to frame it. Not just defense, but building future advantage.
Exactly.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, here's something to think about for everyone listening. Of all these action steps we discussed, the mapping, the diversifying, inventory, optimization, collaboration, advocacy, which one feels like it could make the biggest positive difference for your company's resilience right now, given these tariff pressures?
It's a good question to ponder.
Definitely worth considering as you navigate the coming months.
And just a reminder for those who want to dig deeper, do check out the resources we touched on. Things like McKinsey's work on supply chain risk, Clarkston Consulting on F&B tariff impacts, the Consumer Brands Association's Tariff Hub, Food Logistics on packaging costs, and the U.S. Customs info on foreign trade zones.
Lots of good material there to explore further.
Definitely. They offer a lot more detail and specific frameworks that can really help you build that resilient CPG business we've been talking about.